Hi, I'm Vanessa,
And I'm David.
and we're here to talk about our son Lyric and his diagnosis with cystic fibrosis and why we chose to start a 5K fun run, Walk with Lyric.
Yeah. We both met later in life. She was 37 and I was 41.
So he's a little bit older. Anyways, I had already raised four kids on my own for about 10 years, and they were 18, 17, 15, and 13 at the time. And when David and I met, we knew, we had both waited our whole lives to have this fairy tale story that we had heard about and never really believed was possible. And so when we met, we knew almost immediately that we wanted to have a child together. I had dreamed for years of what it would be like to have a partner and raise a child in love and in a healthy marriage, the way that I had seen some people do it, but never had, the chance to experience on my own, and David hadn't either. So we very quickly decided that we wanted to have a family together, but it wasn't as easy as we had hoped for. There was a lot of challenges along the way. We had a few miscarriages, which was really hard because it would always get to the point where we're like, okay, we're so excited, let's tell people, and then the next thing you know, a few days later we lose a baby, and then you have to go through all of that, of the heartache of the failed pregnancy, and then wondering too if we were ever going to have that chance. But we held on to faith, even though my oldest son kept telling me my eggs were too old. It was never going to happen. So
That's true.
we all, after the second loss, it was strange. We all kind of came on board, like all the kids, even my oldest son. We were all really wishing, hoping, and then praying that we would have this miracle, because we all felt like there was someone else that needed to be added to the family to kind of, I guess, complete, tie us all together. So we were really, really happy in March when 2019, when we found out that we were pregnant again. And of course, more cautious this time to open our mouths and tell the world how excited we were, because we had had a couple miscarriages and didn't want that to happen again. But we had a very different feeling this time. It was like this is going to be okay, and we held on to that throughout the whole pregnancy. We kind of had to. Um, so shortly after finding out we were pregnant, we went in for our first doctor's appointment. And of course, with my progressed age, the doctors had some concerns with not cystic fibrosis. Actually, that was never even mentioned. Down syndrome. There was a very high chance of that happening, and so they suggested that maybe we get some genetic testing done. But we, in that appointment, very quickly, we just said no. We didn't want to have to worry about things, and if that was going to be the case, that we're going to have a child with Down syndrome, Dave and I knew that it was going to be ours, and it would be meant for us, and that we were going to love it the same way we would a child that didn't have Down syndrome or had any complications. So it didn't really matter to us, because we just wanted whatever was meant for us and a part of us together, our own little us.
And knowing that it was going to be us.
Yes. And so it didn't matter. So we said, no, we're not going to do that. We actually wanted the least invasive pregnancy as possible. I opted out of a lot of the testing. We didn't even do the testing for diabetes or anything. It was just like, no, let's just let this go as God planned, and everything will be okay. So we had a very easy pregnancy as far as the way the doctors look at it.
Easy.
I did not necessarily have it easy. I had about every symptom under the book, but as far as when we went in for our appointments, my blood pressure was always great. I didn't have swelling. The doctors were always really impressed and kind of just shoot us out the door like, you guys are fine, just go. You're pros at this, whatever, just go. And everything looked really great. We found out, halfway through the pregnancy that we're having a son, which was super exciting. And Lyric was going to be the name for a girl or a boy. It didn't matter. Just the middle name was going to be different. Actually, not different, just spelled differently. It was going to be Lyric Lane for a girl and Lyric Lane for a boy, but just with a Y if it was a girl in the middle. So Lyric was on the way, and we knew the whole time it was going to be baby Lyric. And then everything kind of changed at the end of October. We had been having this really healthy pregnancy. I had felt really
very smooth.
Yeah, and not just that, but I was so connected to Lyric in a different kind of way than I had been with my other kids. He was after he was born, the NICU staff called him a very opinionated baby, and I would say even when he was in my stomach, he was very opinionated. He had his routines, his schedules, and I was very connected to them. I was working a desk job, so I always knew that Lyric would have hiccups 4 times by the time I'd go to lunch every day. And so it was just these routines, and I knew that if I ate certain foods, he would get up and start moving. I knew certain music that he liked. He loved bluegrass when I was pregnant. Wasn't my favorite, but he loved it. He would get up and start moving to that. So we were just very connected. And at the end of October, and I remember specifically it was the 28th, because it was exactly a month before he was due, I started feeling this urgency to get him out.
Almost dread.
Yeah, it was, something came over me that week, and I told David, I said, I think our baby needs to come out. Like, I think he needs to be born. Now, my thinking was, I'm married to a giant. He was a giant when he was born. I mean, huge. So I was kind of dreading for myself too, thinking, I need to get this baby out because it's a giant, and I'm not going to be able to get it out a month from now. So that was my thinking, was that he was just really big, and not that he was had the condition that he has. So that dread set in for about a week, and then it was November 1st, and my son had a championship football game, and I was up in the stands, dancing, jumping, 9 months pregnant, have you, and
if I remember, Lyric was also...
Yes, he was moving like crazy too.
He was also very excited.
Yeah, he was going nuts that night, so it was the two of us, we were both excited and cheering on Brandon. And it was very common when I had like if we had a very busy day the day before, or even if I had been like very sick the night before, that he would be really nice and give his mommy rest the next morning. And so he might not get up as early and wake me up as early like he usually would, like kicking and moving around. So the next morning, he didn't wake up kicking and moving around like he usually does. But we just said, oh, it's because I had a busy day the day before. He's just resting. He's giving me a break. Which we were totally okay with, but...
So we went about our day.
Yeah, we went about our day.
Errands and shopping.
And about noon, I started getting concerned because there was no hiccups. And we always called him Baby Hiccup. It was his nickname when he was in my belly. We'd call him Hiccup because he'd always have those hiccups 4 times before noon. So then I started convincing myself, okay, he is ready to come out. He's getting quiet because he's saving his energy. He's going to be born. So, that's what I started thinking at that point in the day. But I still wanted, I guess, to feel him, for that reassurance. So I decided I'll start eating some sugar because he could not resist sugar. If I had sugar, that baby went crazy. And then I think had some caffeine because they're like, this, he'll definitely wake up a little bit if I do this. And unfortunately, he
Still
didn't.
Nothing.
There was nothing. So we continued doing our errands for the day. But dread really started to set in that evening. We came home.
It was about dinner time.
We went out and actually ate very spicy food because that was another thing. It was like, okay, spicy food will make him move and get him moving even if he's getting ready to be born. And so we went out and ate some spicy food, and then we came home and I got in the bathtub, and that was something I did every night. And that was a time where he would kind of relax too, but also move around, and still no movement. And after an entire day of no movement, I got out of the tub and I said to David, I was like, we're going to the hospital. And he said, oh, you sure you don't want to just rest? And I said, no, we have to go. And so he didn't hesitate. We just got in the car and made the drive, which was only like 5-10 minutes to the hospital. And when we got there, the first thing, luckily they received us and listened to us and were like, okay, let's, do a well baby check, make sure everything's okay. They didn't turn us away or say, oh, it's fine. So they took us in right away. They went to look for a fetal heartbeat, and what seemed like 20 minutes, which was probably only about a minute, it took them to find the heartbeat. But it seemed like 20 because that minute was just like where, he's big enough that they should have been able to find a heartbeat really easy. And yet they're searching and searching, and finally we hear it. But right away the nurse says, well, there's something wrong. His heartbeat is weak, number one, and number two, it was erratic. And so they said, we're going to bring in an ultrasound machine, and we're also going to bring in, and I don't remember what it was called, but it
was just like a little vibration, something to shock the belly, not with electricity, but the quick vibrations. They say, the babies respond to that, and we can get them to move.
Yeah, they said if we have a baby that's sleepy for some reason or not wanting to move, they do the vibration and it always kickstarts the baby. So they did the first one, and it almost felt like an electrical shock, and it made him move a slight bit. It was like kind of almost like he jumped like I jumped, because we both kind of jumped. And so at least I felt, him move, and they had the ultrasound going, and they could see him too, as they were trying to get him to move. But then they did another shock, and nothing. And they're watching, and they're not seeing his limbs move, nothing.
I remember her saying this always works.
Yeah,
I don't know why
I don't know
it's
why
not
this isn't
working.
working. Babies always respond to this. So at that point, they stopped the shocks and they decided just to try to do the ultrasound, a more in-depth one, to see if they could see anything that was going on. And I remember the lady was hovering over one area. It was our baby's stomach, because I wanted to, of course, like look at the face or anything else you could see. They're doing ultrasound. I was like, I want to see his face. We'd only seen it, 5 months before that. We didn't get any extra ultrasounds, but she kept hovering over the stomach and taking measurements, and she was getting very quiet, which I picked up on, Dave picked up on, but we were still like, oh, she's just doing her job and being thorough, and so that's good.
Level of concern growing.
Yeah, it was definitely growing, definitely. And so she ends up very nicely. I mean, she was very polite about. She's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go get the doctor now, and she leaves the room, and immediately after, the nurses come in and they start asking me my blood type and they put wristbands on me, and Dave and I both knew
Level of concern
that they're
goes
not
higher.
coming to do that when they're just monitoring you. So we're like, hey, what's going on? And the nurse is like, the doctor is right on her way. And we're like, not waiting for the doctor. We're like, no, we want to know. But right then the doctor comes walking in and tells us that they're going to take us in for emergency C-section, that the baby needed to be born that night. The only thing that they could see on the ultrasound that was concerned was our baby's stomach was extremely distended. So it was very swollen, and they could see blackness in it that wasn't supposed to be there. But at that same point, there was no diagnosis. There was no, we think it's this. It was just like, let's get the baby out so we can find out what's going on. So we were rushed down to surgery, and I mean, we were holding it together amazingly well, because this was like my worst nightmare. I wanted a drug-free, non-invasive.
We had the
we had a
birth
plan. Okay, we had this plan, and it was not. All the kids were going to be there. All of my adult children, pretty much adult children, were going to be there on board for when we had the baby. My daughter Mariah was going to be my coach. Hold my hand. So we had all this stuff planned. So we're calling the kids in now, like, come to the hospital. We're having the baby. We want you guys here. So they all show up and they say, goodbye to me, or not goodbye, but
laughed at me getting dressed.
Yes,
and
gave me hugs and kisses, to send me on my way, and reassurance, Mom, you're gonna be fine, everything's gonna be fine. So we went into surgery, and when they opened me up and pulled Lyric out, I didn't get to see him. Dave got to see him. I didn't get to see him, but the first thing Dr. Campbell said was, well, we're gonna call this one Lucky, which is how Lyric got his nickname, Lucky Lyric Lane, the 3 L's, because he was born with his cord completely in a knot. And Dr. Campbell said, when we have a baby born like this, we call them lucky that they survived, because it is so rare that a child's cord gets in a complete knot and that they don't die, because usually it cuts off all of their oxygen. And it was already tightened down. So the fact he was alive was incredible. So that was his whole pregnancy was miraculous, the whole thing. But this was like, wow, that was our first miracle.
This was our first sign
that there was something really
special.
special about this baby. And I mean, even right afterwards, they take him over and they started working on him, and I still hadn't been able to see him at all. I didn't know what his face looked like. I could see his foot kicking and I could hear him, and that was enough for me, just to hear him and see his little foot kicking. And they were, sewing me back together. And about 20 minutes went by, and I still hadn't been able to hold him, look at him, but, hear him. So I knew he was okay. And then they came over and they said, we're going to have to life flight Lyric to Sacred Heart for observation.
Yeah, they didn't have
they didn't know
the proper imaging stuff here in Moscow at Grytman to really find out what the distension in his stomach was.
And when he was born, it was like discolored to his stomach. It was so distended. I mean, it looked so abnormal, and it was hard to the touch, and they didn't want to do anything because they were very concerned. They had no clue what this could be and why this was happening to him. So of course, when they gave me that news, I started to bawl. And I said, can I just see him? I just wanted to see what he looked like, kiss him, hold him before they took him. And they said, of course, we'll let you see him. So they brought him over, and we had about 2 minutes where Dave, was right next to me. We held him, and I was like trying to memorize his little face and his smell and kiss him and get all my loves in that I could in that moment, because I knew that he was going to be 2 hours away from me. And I also knew that I was going to have to recover in a different hospital, and I wouldn't be able to go with him. So that was hard, but we had our moment there, and then they had to start packaging him up, I call it, because they had him in this incubator that was like a rocket ship. There was so much stuff, tied to him, and so many lines and different things. But they were nice enough. The hospital staff was actually so gracious to us that entire time because they knew 10 years before I had been in that same hospital and I had actually lost a child at birth. And so they knew how much my heart was hurting from that and how scared I was. And so they brought me to the room that they were getting him all ready in, and there was a window, and they pulled my bed right up to the window, and they, propped the head up so I could just barely see him. And I remember watching, and he was crying, and I remember there was a nurse that was just holding his hand for comfort, and I remember wanting it to be me. I was like, I want to be holding his hand, but I was just happy that somebody was there with him, comforting him. And then they wheeled me back to my room and brought him in right before they took him on the helicopter, and they let me hold his hand through a little window. They opened it up, and I have a picture where I'm holding his hand and saying goodbye. I'll see you later, buddy. And at that point, they took him out, and Dave and I just held hands, and I think there was some crying as we heard him, the helicopter leaving with our baby, and I'll never forget that noise. And the
Very
room,
heavy sound.
Yeah, that was our baby flying off, and I asked my husband to stay with me. My last experience in that hospital, going home without a baby, was really deep on my mind, and I said, please just don't leave me right now. I need you here with me. So we opted to have my wonderful friend and longtime friend Tiffany Skinner. I called her. It was like 3 a.m. when I called her, and she was like, what can I do? Where do you want me? And she showed up, and she and my oldest daughter Mariah, who is now 18 at the time, they went to Sacred Heart to go be with Lyric, so that we could be together, and Dave could help me recover and help me to get up there as soon as possible, because that was our goal, get up there as soon as possible. What happened in the next hours was really difficult. Even though we had signed off power of
the HIPAA release.
Yeah, and we had to sign a bunch of paperwork when he got put on that life flight to allow Tiffany and my daughter to be the ones that represented us up there for him, because neither of us were going with him. And so even though we had signed all that and they were up there, we were all, even the people up there, were all left in the dark for 6 hours. We had no clue what happened with Lyric. We had no phone calls, and at that 6-hour mark, that's when Dad was starting to get a little bit, he was like, what's going on? Where's our baby at? Why haven't we heard anything? So he's on the phone with Sacred Heart like crazy, and they're transferring back and forth, and finally, after 8 hours, we get a call back from a surgeon who then tells us, unfortunately,
the surgery went fine. So that's the information that we got. Our son had an emergency surgery, but it went fine.
Yeah, and that was a little crazy. They said that they opened him up and that they had to take out 25 centimeters of dead intestines between the large and small, and that they had to take out part of his small intestines. Now, me picturing this while hearing it on the phone, I am thinking, oh my gosh, my child just got cut up here, there, everywhere. They've taken out his body parts. And then they said, we left him with because what they had to do, and the doctor was actually this doctor from California, and he was really good at what he did, because he was able to reroute everything, reattach, and then he put a backup valve, as they were referring to it. A stoma. So that's his intestines were routed through his belly button. But it was amazing work, because, like I said, I thought he was going to be cut up into pieces, and it was just this little incision, and then the intestines were through the belly button. So it really wasn't as big of a deal as I was thinking in my head at the time. But they did tell us at that point that when they went in there, that they found something. When they were taking out the intestines, they said they found fibroids. And that was their the first time that we heard cystic fibrosis. And they said, there's a very likely chance that your son has cystic fibrosis. And so we're like, okay, we both have heard of that word before, but we didn't know what it actually meant at all. So the doctor, starts telling us that they are doing testing, that they took some of Lyric's blood, and they're doing the genetic testing to see if he does indeed have cystic fibrosis. But with the meconium ileus, which is the condition that Lyric had, where his intestines became necrotic and twisted on themselves because when a baby's in utero, they are drinking amniotic fluid, and then they are supposed to pass it through urine and pooping, and that's how everything, you know, I guess, kind of starts working and functioning. And since he couldn't, because the meconium actually plugged up his intestines, he never was able to pass anything. So his intestines, right when they caught it, when he was born, they were actually swelling up to rupture. So he would have been dead from either the cord being knotted or the intestines within a day. I mean, it was just two death sentences.
That quick,
it was
so
that, and even the doctors afterwards, when we were recovering in one hospital, Dr. Trin, who's amazing, she came in and she was crying to us, and she kept saying, "You have the smartest little boy." I mean, he didn't move because he knew his life, you know, was on the line. I feel like he knew that he needed to be here with us, and so we had definitely an army of angels protecting us and protecting him to make everything happen the way it did. And the doctors kept telling us that that's what they dream of, is a situation where the doctors know, the mom knows, and it all works out, because usually it doesn't have that. It doesn't turn out that way. So they were emotional. We were emotional. We were all just so grateful. And even though we kept getting hit with worse news, because it really was, it kind of just, everything we heard at that point was like, oh, one more thing, you know. First there's the surgery, then it's like, okay, he might have this condition called cystic fibrosis. We look it up. And we're, again, Dave's always said the worst use of imagination, or worry is the worst use of imagination.
Worry is the worst use of imagination.
So we were really not going to focus on anything until we had diagnoses. We just wanted to stay as positive as possible for ourselves and for our baby. And
we
again,
had faith that
yeah,
everything was going to be okay.
Yeah, and we did. We were scared, but we did. We had a really strong faith, and we had each other. And so that really helped too, because nothing ever seems hard with Dave. I mean, we've always just had that. We have each other's backs, and it's amazing. So anyways, after 3 days of recovering in one hospital, I was finally released to go up to Spokane and see my baby again. And that reunion, let me just tell you, we walked in the NICU, and I am just like, and Dave had actually gone up there just to visit Lyric after the surgery, so he had actually seen where he was at. So when we walk into this NICU that's all locked, and you get in the first door, and then there's just 3 pods, right? There's 3 different separate pods. So Dave says, our baby's in that pod, and he's in that room. And so I'm, you know, trying to look, but we have to stop at the desk. We have to do this hand washing thing. Then we have to show our IDs and get, you know, our special wristbands and everything.
And this is all pre-COVID.
Yeah, this was pre-COVID. And I'm just like, I just want to get to that baby and just hold him and kiss him. But, you know, it just couldn't happen soon enough. But we got in there, and I was told I wouldn't be able to hold him because he had, you know, just had surgery a couple days before, and that he was recovering and still on pain meds and everything. So we walked in, and I just went right to him and held his hand and was like, you know, I'm back. I missed you. And, of course, there was tears and emotions and all that stuff. And then the nurse said to me the words that I dreamed of hearing. She said, "Do you want to hold him?" And I was like, wait, what? And you don't understand what that's like until you have a kid in the NICU, where you don't have those opportunities, and then, you know, where you can't just hold them. So for us, it was like, we get to hold our baby. Oh my gosh, yes. And Dave didn't even try to be selfish and say, well, I want to hold him too, because he knew how important it was to me. So he just let me have that time, because we didn't want to hand him back and forth either, because he was really fragile at that point. So he just let me hog him to myself, which was really great. For that whole first day, he actually let me hog him to myself, and I held him and talked to him, and he looked just perfect. He looked perfect. It wasn't, after everything, I just was like, wow, he's perfect. Right after we got there, it was almost immediate that Lyric had a turnaround. It was like he knew that we were there with him. And as soon as we got there, he had been on pain meds that whole time. And once we got there, he stopped needing them. He wasn't crying, because they usually give him if the baby shows they're in pain by crying, you know, because they can't say I'm in pain. But he didn't. He was just so content. And so they said, well, he doesn't need his pain meds. And the quicker that they could get him off the pain meds, the quicker they could get him to eating and trying to get back on track. And so
we were all right with it.
Yeah, so we were so excited, because in the first couple days, everything was like positive, and it was going really good. And they finally said, you know, they started taking some of his, he had a Repogol tube that went into his mouth and down into his stomach for drainage. He also had the what was the mask thing he had on? I can't remember, but they had taken off too.
I can't remember the name, but it was just
Yeah.
just to assist his breathing in case he
Yeah.
needed it. But
CPAP or something.
something like that.
Anyhow, so they had slowly started taking things off of him, so that was exciting. And we had a nurse come in, and she's like, "If he keeps going like this, you guys are gonna be home next week." And we're like, "Oh, thank goodness! Oh, this is great." So they cleared him to have a little bit of my breast milk that I had pumped, and they started giving him that, and we were really excited because everything was going great. And we went to our home at the Ronald McDonald House where we were staying. Great place, by the way. Just can't say enough about it. And when we were at the Ronald McDonald House, we're just like, okay, we'll be here for like a week. We'll pretend like we're on a vacation. This is our new condo. We got free chocolate milk whenever we want it. People coming in to cook meals for you. And so it wasn't so bad at first. And then when we went back to the hospital, I think it was like day 3, he was hooked back up to stuff again. And they told us that he couldn't eat anymore because he hadn't pooped yet. And this became a 3-week long standstill holding pattern, which was the longest 3 weeks. I think it was more like 3 years in our minds, because every day we would come and our baby couldn't eat. And so he would be crying, he'd be nuzzling my breasts because he knew that I was supposed to feed him, and he could smell my milk, and I would have to go pump it and not be able to feed it to him. And it was so hard for me mentally as a mom because he was giving me all the signs, and he knew I was his mama, and he knew the milk was there. Yeah, I couldn't even feed him. But they couldn't because after a surgery like that, his intestines had to heal, and they had to heal enough that he could actually have a bowel movement. And unfortunately, they don't always heal as quick as parents want them to, or anyone wants them to. And so for Lyric, it took 3 weeks, and it was 3 weeks of every single day they were having to do multiple x-rays on him, which was horrible. You don't want your child getting x-rays day after day after day, multiple. They were going in through the stoma in his stomach, and they were trying to push stuff through that way. They were trying anything. They were putting dyes in him to see like where it was stopping, and they were telling us, well, there is a blockage in there, we see poop in there. And I was like, I don't think there's poop in there. I mean, he hasn't eaten. How can there be poop in there? And of course, I'm challenging them a little bit because I'm his mother, and I don't understand. If I could have seen the outcome that they were right and they knew what they were doing, and that's the hard part is in the NICU, you really have to trust the medical staff because they know so much more than you do. But it's hard as a parent because it's also your child. So we
weren't seeing
anything, and it was like. And it got to the point where our son was getting blood transfusions. He had to get 2 blood transfusions because he wasn't eating. And even though they were giving him IV nutrients that were like vitamins and stuff, it wasn't enough for him to not have his red blood cells drop down. So he was getting blood transfusions and all these things. And I was like, this isn't right. This is horrible. And it was just hard. It's very mentally taxing. Those 3 weeks were the hardest for us to stay positive. And we did everything we could. We'd play music for Lyric. We had some friends that I didn't even know their prayer group at church, but they had brought us a gift bag, and it had a children's Bible in it. And so I would actually just sit there and I would read for hours to him in this children's Bible. And then anything we had, we would just, read to him, play music for him, trying to make it a little more comfortable in there. And during this time, of course, we are waiting for the diagnosis for our baby, and that lasted about 2 weeks into our stay there.
We were also told he might have cystic fibrosis. No, he might not have cystic fibrosis. It was like, there was a test after test, and they just nobody could seem to get on the same page with letting us know. So that was another thing that made those weeks tremendously long. But when it finally came in, but it
wasn't exactly like that. So we were going out to eat for my daughter Kalina's 16th birthday, and she had come up with the other kids, and so we're going out to eat, and that's when I got a phone call on the way to going out to eat where they said that they did find 1 copy of the cystic fibrosis gene, and yet they're telling us that. So then I was like, so he does have cystic fibrosis. Well, we only found 1 copy. He needs 2 copies. So I was like, he does? He doesn't? He does? He does? Well, we have to find the other copy. Most likely there's other copy there, but it's a rarer copy, and it's the R1066H was the second copy, and that's the rare copy. And so when they test for cystic fibrosis, they only test for certain mutations and the most common ones first. And because it's very expensive, all the testing that they have to do. And so then if it's not within that, then they have to do another group, and then they'll do it. And there's up to 2,000 different variations. But they don't test for all the variations because of the expense at first. So they had found that one of his copies was a Delta 508, which is a very common, like the most common mutation of cystic fibrosis. So I was, throughout the whole dinner, I'm just like looking at my phone and I'm learning as much as I can, and of course scaring the crap out of myself at the same time, because when you read things on the internet, of course you're seeing the good, the bad, the ugly, the worst, a lot of the worst case scenarios. So it was a very quiet evening, to say the least. And the next day, and then also the doctor had told us, well, that the copy that he has, it's a less severe copy. So then I was like, okay, at least it's a least severe copy of the genetic mutation. So then the next day we go to the hospital. We have another doctor that comes in and says, or maybe it was like 2 days later, where they had found the second copy. And then we went from finding out, that he did for sure have cystic fibrosis, but he also had a more severe mutation in the second copy. And that was, that's the thing we got stuck on for a while, is severe, until wonderful Dr. McCarthy, who is our pulmonologist out there, he came in and he talked to David and I, and he explained to us that we don't want to get stuck on the word severe, because so much has to do with the way that the parents cope with the disease, how they teach the child to cope with the disease, how we take care of him in the home, the kind of home life he has. And so he explained all those things to us, and he was like very positive, like, I think you guys are going to be okay. And we're like, okay. Also, upon his diagnosis, when the whole team came in to meet with us, and it's a team, I mean, you got your nutritionalist, I mean, you got not the counselor, but what's her title?
Caseworker,
the social worker. And we had this whole great team that comes in, and they were all smiles. They came in, and to tell us the diagnosis.
Even the intern was smiling.
Yeah, and we're like, so you're telling us our child has a disease that is life-shortening, but and there's no cure for it currently, but you guys are smiling. And the reason they were smiling was 3 days before his birth, which is, I think it was 3 days. It was 3 or 4 days before his birth. They released a drug called Trikafta. Trikafta is the closest thing that they have to a cure for cystic fibrosis. It's a gene modifier. And it really helps save the lungs, because usually people with cystic fibrosis end up dying of lung disease. Sadly, that's needing transplants. And you can only have a certain amount in a lifetime, and a lot of people in their 20s with CF have had 2 to 3 already, which is crazy when you think about it, going through that. So they were explaining to us that this drug Trikafta is out there, and that it works with Delta 508, and since he had one copy of that Lyric would be able to start this drug when he's 2 years old. And so they were really like positive and excited about all these new things that were happening, and we were just kind of taking it all in little by little. And at that point,